Picture this. 750 men, that's all you have. And coming straight at you, 4,000 trained soldiers, cannons, professional killers who do this for a living. They outnumber you 5 to 1. There's no road left to run, no general above you to give the order. The decision is entirely yours. What would you do? October 18th, 1776. A Massachusetts fisherman named John Glover stood on a hilltop above Pelham Bay, raised a borrowed spyglass to his eye, and watched the entire war change in front of him. 200 boats, 4,000 soldiers, 7 cannons. All of it crawling toward a quiet dirt road that led straight into the back of George Washington's army. Glover had 750 men, no general above him for miles, and about 3 hours to decide what happened next. The British called it a flanking maneuver. Historians would later call it one of the most dangerous mornings of the entire revolution, because if this landing succeeded, there would be no Trenton, no Saratoga, no Yorktown. There would just be an army trapped on an island, surrounded and finished, barely a year after independence had even been declared. What happened in the next several hours is still debated by historians today. Some accounts say Glover's men held a single line, others describe something closer to a relay, a vanishing trick repeated again and again along a single road. But every account agrees on this much. By the time the sun went down, an army of 4,000 had been stopped cold by 750 men hiding behind a few stone walls. Stay with this one. The how is the entire story. By the autumn of 1776, the Continental Army was not winning a war. It was barely surviving one. Washington's forces had been routed at Long Island in August, driven off Manhattan piece by piece through September, and pushed into a shrinking pocket around Harlem Heights. Each defeat had the same shape. The British landing somewhere unexpected, flanking before the Americans could react, and Washington pulling back just far enough to avoid total collapse. New York City was gone. The Great Fire that swept through it in mid-September had taken a third of the city with it, and now the British held what remained. General William Howe understood exactly what he had. He commanded the largest, best-trained, best-equipped army Britain had ever sent across an ocean, backed by Hessian regiments hired specifically because they were professional soldiers, not farmers with muskets. Howe didn't need to destroy Washington in open battle. He only needed to get behind him, trap him against the water with no road left to retreat on, and the war would be over before winter. On October 12th, Howe tried exactly that, landing thousands of men at Throg's Neck, a narrow finger of land northeast of Manhattan. It should have worked. Instead, a handful of Americans tore up a single bridge, and Howe's entire army sat stalled for 6 days, unable to cross. It was a delay, not a defeat, and Howe knew it. So on the night of October 17th, under cover of darkness, he loaded his men back onto the boats and tried again. This time the target was a few miles north, a quiet landing point called Pell's Point. Washington saw the danger building before the boats ever moved. He didn't have an army he could afford to lose, so he started shifting his main force toward White Plains, a safer position inland. But someone had to hold the road behind him long enough for that movement to finish. That job fell to a 43-year-old colonel most of Washington's officers barely knew by name. John Glover was not a career soldier. He was a merchant and a sea captain from Marblehead, Massachusetts, a fishing town that had given the army something unusual. An entire regiment of sailors who could read tides, currents, and bad weather the way other men read maps. Glover and his Marbleheaders had already saved this army once, rowing thousands of soldiers across the East River in total silence after the disaster at Long Island. Howe's army had woken up the next morning to find the Americans simply gone. That escape had taught Glover something most officers never learn. Sometimes the best move on a battlefield is the one the enemy doesn't see being made at all. That instinct was about to matter more than anyone realized. Because the officer technically in command of this sector, Major General Charles Lee, was 3 miles away, and when Glover's man rode out to request orders, no reply came in time. Glover was now the senior officer on the ground, whether headquarters had decided that or not. He had a hilltop, a spyglass, and 4,000 enemy soldiers pouring onto the beach below him. There was no time to wait for permission, so he didn't. Howe, meanwhile, had every reason for confidence. His advance guard was made up of British light infantry and grenadiers, among the most experienced troops in his entire army, supported by Hessian regiments and dismounted dragoons. On paper, this wasn't a fight, it was a formality. 4,000 professional soldiers marching up one quiet country road against a brigade most of them had never even heard of. Glover made his decision fast. He sent his own regiment into reserve along with 3 small field guns, then rode out personally to take command of an advance party of about 40 men. Bait, essentially. Men whose job was to make contact with the British and then fall back. Behind them, he arranged his real plan along the road itself. Low stone walls, the kind New England farmers had been stacking for generations, running on both sides of the lane that led inland from the beach. Picture the ground from above for a second. A narrow dirt road, walled in on either side by waist-high stone, cutting through farmland toward the village of Eastchester. From the air, it looks unremarkable, just another colonial lane. From the British side, marching up it, it would have looked exactly the same. Empty fields, quiet stone walls, nothing to suggest danger. That was the entire point. Glover staggered 3 regiments at separate intervals down that road, each one hidden behind its own wall, each one given the same instruction. Hold your position, fire until the enemy is too close to survive it, then fall back past the next hidden line and let them take over. It wasn't a single ambush, it was an ambush that could reload itself. Pay attention to this part, because it's the detail that makes the entire plan work. Most defensive lines in this war held one position and either won or broke. Glover built something closer to a relay race, where every retreat wasn't a defeat, it was reloading the trap for the next regiment in line. Late in the morning, the British vanguard ran into Glover's 40-man decoy force near the road. Muskets cracked, the Americans fired their volley and then did exactly what they were supposed to do. They pulled back. To the British officers leading the column, this looked like exactly what they expected. Amateur militia, a token resistance, already breaking. They pushed forward harder. What they didn't know was that 200 men of the Massachusetts 13th Regiment were lying flat behind the very next stone wall, weapons loaded, waiting until the British column closed to 30 yards. 30 yards, close enough to see faces. The Americans rose together and fired directly into the advancing line. The column staggered. Men dropped where they stood. And before the British could organize a real response, the Americans who had just fired were already falling back, vanishing behind the next wall down the road, reloading as they moved. The British reformed and came again, and this is where the fighting turned brutal. Waiting at the next position was the 3rd Massachusetts Regiment, under Colonel William Shepherd, and this time the British pushed to point-blank range before either side broke. For the better part of an hour, the two sides simply poured fire into each other across that single stone wall. Glover later wrote that his men fired at least 17 rounds apiece into the advancing column, a volume of fire almost unheard of for troops this outnumbered. Shepherd himself took a musket ball through the neck in the middle of it and stayed on the field. That's the kind of detail historians don't need to embellish. By early afternoon, the math had stopped favoring the Americans. General Charles Cornwallis had used the chaos at the front to swing a second British column wide around Glover's left flank, threatening to surround the entire brigade. Glover saw it happening from the same hilltop instinct that had started his day, and made the second hardest call of the battle. He ordered a full withdrawal across the Hutchinson River, in good order, regiment by regiment, the same disciplined retreat that had saved this army once before at Long Island. Howe's army, bloodied and cautious, did not pursue. When the smoke cleared along that road, the numbers told a strange story. American losses were remarkably light, only a handful killed, a slightly larger number wounded. British and Hessian losses were estimated, in several contemporary accounts, in the hundreds, though the exact figure is still debated, and some later historians argue it was inflated over the years. What's not disputed is the result. An army of 4,000 had been stopped, slowed and bloodied by 750 men who never had any intention of winning the ground. They only needed to win the morning. That single morning was enough. While Howe's army sat stalled along that bloodied road, Washington completed the move his entire army desperately needed, out of the trap at Manhattan, north toward the safer high ground at White Plains. The same kind of escape, on land this time instead of water, that Glover's men had already pulled off once before by sea. There's a strange historical echo buried in this battle. 2 months later, on Christmas night, it would be Glover and his Marblehead sailors again, this time rowing Washington's army across an ice-choked Delaware River for the strike at Trenton. The victory historians point to as the moment that saved the Revolution. What's almost never mentioned is that Trenton only happened because an army survived October 1st. And that army survived October because of one colonel on one hilltop who didn't wait for orders that weren't coming. Historians sometimes compare this kind of fighting retreat to the campaigns of Fabius Maximus, the Roman general who refused to meet a stronger enemy head-on and instead wore him down through delay after delay. Glover never read a word of Fabius. He read tides and currents for a living, but the instinct was the same. You don't always need to win the fight in front of you. Sometimes you only need to survive it long enough for the war behind it to keep going.